whole new property, so.
6 o'clock. Wow, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So we've got our.
We got it.
No bell either?
He'll be here.
What's
All right.
Did you get yours? Which ones was it? Just about that. Are we
Good evening and welcome to the City of Topeka Planning Commission meeting. We are a commission appointed by the mayor and city council to plan for the orderly growth and development of the community, to hold public hearings and to make recommendations to the city council on planning items. Please note that the city council rules state that the public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. No additional public hearings will be conducted by the city council. Tonight's cases are tentatively scheduled to be heard by the city council next month. Agendas can be found at topeka.org. For cases that require public hearings, the procedures will be as follow. First, the planning department staff will summarize the case. Next, we will hear from the applicant or their representative. Then we will receive public testimony. Public comments should be addressed solely to the chair and are limited to 4 minutes. Chris, please take the roll.
Mr. Armstrong?
Here.
Mr. Dean?
Here.
Mr. Freed?
Here.
Mr. Kanar? Mr. Kalp?
Here.
Ms. Lawson? Ms. Messina? Ms. Bringler? And Mr. Warner?
Here.
We have 5 for a quorum.
Thank you. Approval of minutes, November 18th, 2019 meeting.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second for approval. Chris, take the roll, please.
Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Aye.
Mr. Kalp?
Aye.
And Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. Item C, declaration of conflict of interest, ex parte communications by members of the commission or staff. Hearing none, we will move to item D, public hearings. We have 2 items under number 1 tonight, Shorey Automotive. Ms. Feeney, do we,
I
you
think
wanna-
it might
you wanna
be
address
more
that?
expeditious just to go through both of them and then hold one public hearing because they're so interconnected that it just makes sense if staff could go through A and B and then we'll hold the public hearing.
Yeah, no problem with that.
Would we still do separate votes on each of the items?
Yes, separate votes.
Item 1A, it doesn't have a staff assigned to it. Ms. Driver, maybe?
That would be me.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item is Z19-9. It's by Shorey Automotive. There. And a zone change request. The applicant or the owner, and the owner is requesting a zone change from R2, single-family dwelling district. Let me get this working here first. Oh, yeah, that would help. All right. I don't know.
It's not working.
No, it's not.
This works.
Oh, that works too. Sorry. Okay, there we go. Okay. The property is located at 1422 Northwest Eugene Street, and it's just south of his existing repair shop, which is at the southeast corner of Paramore and Eugene. Actually, there's one property between his repair shop and the subject property. He's requesting to rezone this site from R2, single-family dwelling district, to X1, mixed-use district. The property comprises .31 acres. The owner has expressed the intention of using the property for parking of vehicles that are waiting repair or waiting pickup, and it clearly associated with his repair shop at the corner of Paramore and Eugene. The site historically contained a mobile home park that had 4 mobile homes until they were removed by this owner in 2016. The mobile home park was there since at least 1972 under a special use permit. The intent of the X1 district is to facilitate a mixed-use activity center within a traditional neighborhood setting. Some of the uses, X1 allows both residential uses, single, 2, 3, and 4 family dwellings, and neighborhood-scaled retail uses. Some of the uses not allowed in X1 are repair shops themselves, which now, under the new zoning, require a CUP. His existing repair shop is legal non-conforming use. The automobile tow lots and long-term storage of wrecked vehicles are not permitted except in C4, I1, and I2. Warehousing and storage and unenclosed warehousing and storage is not permitted in X1 either, and require X2. So X1 does allow some limited commercial uses. The property is small, it's 0.3 acres. It has its small frontage, 50 feet. So building a new building on the site would probably be difficult to satisfy all the requirements. X1 also establishes performance standards for certain uses like parking lots, indicating they should be screened, not dominate the street frontage, require transition yards and landscaping adjacent to residential, and any open storage should be screened as well to reduce its visual impact. Surfacing of the lot. The applicants proposed gravel surfacing to support loads of vehicles parked on the lot. That's allowed by the city's established parking standards if the lot's used on an infrequent basis and not open to the public. Such as this lot, it'll be fenced off. Planning staff's reviewed the case relative to the findings in the code and the golden criteria. Couple of points to make. The zoning of the surrounding properties to the north is X1. Mobile home park, it existed on the property since 1972, has been removed by the owner who had the intention of developing the site for parking. A note on the neighborhood plan, the X1 is not entirely in conformance to the low-density residential, low-density designation. But the zoning change is linked with the CUP, allowing that parking lot in association with the principal use for automobile repair. The site plan does, and I'll get into the site plan conditions in a second, but it does provide for addressing any negative impacts with screening and landscaping. Staff believes the zoning change is really a minimal change to the mixed-use low-intensity designation on the future land use map, which I can't pull up here. Where is it? Okay. It's a minimal change to the mixed-use low-intensity designation on the future land use map, that blue area. Because it's only 50 feet wide, a plan amendment wasn't necessary. The parking lot's also adjacent to a mini warehouse, making it a little less likely it'll be developed for a new single-family residence. Staff is supportive of the X1 zoning in conjunction with the corresponding CUP application. The CUP was needed because this is a parking lot on a different lot separated from its principal use. Once again, it's clearly intended for vehicles that are waiting repair or waiting pickup associated with his repair shop on the corner of Paramore. Couple of facts. The X1 zoning establishes or looks at, so setbacks in X1 allow a range based on what the average setback is on the block. And those setbacks are determined based on the neighborhood and the context. The site plan, one thing about the site plan, it does demonstrate a 16.6 foot, close to 17 foot landscape parking lot setback along Eugene, which is consistent and lines up with the front porch of the adjoining house to the south. The applicant conducted a neighborhood information meeting on Tuesday, November 19th. There was some concern expressed by the neighborhood and the NIA about the rezoning, as well as the CUP for the parking lot. Specifically, general statements about rezoning for more commercial uses, the gravel, even compacted gravel surfacing, and how that might lead to the site becoming a storage lot for junked vehicles, as well as just the issues with this becoming a long-term storage lot for wrecked vehicles. They have provided a letter as well. Ultimately, staff reviewed this subject to CUP standards in the code that are intended to protect the integrity and character of the zoning district. CUPs are intended to establish standards and conditions above the base zoning to ensure neighborhood compatibility, protect character. So some of those, I'm going to go to the site plan here and just highlight what we looked at and what the applicant has agreed to do by providing that on the site plan. As I mentioned, they're showing us close to 17-foot landscape setback from Eugene, which would make this allow for a front yard that's more compatible with the front yards on that block for the residential. The owners also agreed to extend his 4-foot black aluminum, more decorative-looking fence along the frontage of the property. He'll provide a privacy fence along the south property line for screening of the vehicles from the south. There's also a condition on the CUP about limiting vehicles to 7 days for those waiting pickup or repair. So if there's a vehicle on the site longer than 7 days, it would have to be moved, and that's to help ensure it doesn't become a long-term storage lot. Additionally, a note on the paving, the 20-foot closest to the street is required to be paved with concrete and asphalt as part of the city's policy. Staff did look and give consideration to requiring the lot to be paved, as it could improve the long-term appearance of the lot. Ultimately did not make that a recommendation, since most of the parking lot won't be visible from the street, and there is a minimum gravel depth that's required to prevent excessive weeds, mud, and rutting. And staff is recommending approval of the CUP conjunction with the zone change. The applicant's representative and applicant are here as well to take any questions that you may have. And I'm open for your questions as well. Thank you.
Did that essentially conclude both items?
Yes.
Okay. So, with that, Mr. Holland, representing the applicant this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I am here representing Michael Llewellyn. He owns Shorey Automotive. This has been an interesting journey. He's had the shop for some time. If you go back 5 years ago and try to look at the picture or the aerial that's there, it had multiple mobile homes in this small little lot with grass and code enforcement being called quite regularly. Mr. Llewellyn acquired a property, which was very difficult to acquire the property 3 to 4 years ago. At that time, started removing these old mobile homes and has maintained the lot to without any code infractions, which is very important to him. He wants the lot to look nice because he has a business just to the north of it as well. So at that time, the difference in the neighborhood character has improved just in the 4 years, 3 to 4 years that they've had this going forward. Their business is expanding, which is great in North Topeka, but he needs extra space because he's crammed with being able to put vehicles of when they can come in so that he can fix them and put them in a location so that people can come acquire them. That's what this lot is specifically for. It would have a gate at the east and the west end of the lot, so that public access is not available to the lot. And Annie kind of talked specifically about it. On the south side of the lot, there'll be a fence, a privacy fence, so that the people in that house and in the yard there don't see what's going on in the cars that'll be sitting in that lot or whatnot. But rest assured, it'll be a lot better situation than it was even 3 to 4, 5 years ago when we had multiple trailers on that lot. Do you have any questions specifically for, Mr. Llewellyn is here tonight to answer anything specifically that you have for the owner's perspective as well.
I have a question. Is there any additional new lighting being placed for the lot?
Not at this point. There's an existing light. I can answer that. Come on up here.
I saw the existing pole, I just didn't know if there was any others.
I'm Michael Llewellyn, I'm the owner of the lot. I have had Westar come in and take down all the electrical that was going to the trailers. And then there was a pole already there that I had a light put on. There was an old busted out light. And now the lot is lit at night. So there is a light there that shines across that whole lot. It's a directional light that you pay Westar for. I think it's $20-some a month or something. But the pole was there, so I wanted it lit because from time to time there'll be cars sitting there overnight, and I didn't want it dark back there. And plus that whole side of the property was dark back there. It was really dark, but it's lit now.
Is it just the pole on the southwest corner?
The pole is on the southwest corner, yes.
Okay, it's not down next to the house?
No, and I had them put a directional light, so that light, they asked me if I wanted just one that fans out everywhere. Well, I didn't want it shining through the neighbors' windows and stuff, so it shines right across. It's a directional that goes, across that property.
Okay.
And
So I have a question. So you have the one light. If you're going to be using it, are you planning on putting any other lights, or is that one light sufficient?
I went by there at night, it lights it up all the way across there. If anybody's back there prancing around, and the cops come by, they're gonna see them. So that's what I was concerned with, I didn't want somebody to be able to be back there and get comfortable.
Sir, I'm sorry. The vehicles that you propose to park with a lot, are these cars, trucks, what would you have?
They're gonna be cars and just small, just pickups, up to F-350s, F-450s. Not just cars and trucks like you see going down the road every day. We don't work on, we work on an occasional, but 98% of what we work on is just cars and pickups that people drive.
Okay, the reason I ask is you're talking about a 6-foot privacy fence, right?
Yes.
And whether that would adequately shield, obviously, that would seem to cover cars.
Yes.
And you wouldn't have anything larger like vans and so forth that might have more than a 6-foot height to them?
No, just a regular van like you see going down the street, like an E150 or E250. Yeah, I work on those, and you could see one of those there, but, they're not gonna stick up above that fence.
You don't have tractor trailers and things of that nature?
No, don't work on tractor trailers, no, sir.
Thank you.
Is there I see there's 20 stalls laid out here. Is there a magic number of the number of stalls you have, or is that just what you could fit on there?
That's what we could fit on there. We put stalls on there just for reference, because obviously if gravel, we're not going to stripe it.
Right.
But, so to try to put them in there comfortably, Mr. Llewellyn, I believe, would like as many as he possibly could get, but the lot is very narrow, so it's very difficult to even go in at 90 degrees. You have to put them in staggered and make it a one-way situation like we did.
To be honest with you, from time to time, my lot overflows with cars. just from time to time. And well, there's not gonna be a bunch of cars stacked up over there. There's just not. I mean, you're gonna see cars in there from time to time, but there's not gonna be a lot of cars on there. It's just gonna be when the lot overflows, temporary parking when the lot overflows of cars that are getting ready to be worked on or are done. So, on occasion, somebody might, need 2 or 3 days to come pick up a car. Sometimes I work on people's cars that are out of town, on vacation, stuff like this. So it might sit over there for 2 or 3 days till they get back from vacation or wherever they're at. And then the car would be picked up. But I don't know if you're familiar with the way that my parking lot, I don't have cars sitting around there's no cars on my parking lot now that can't be moved. Some of them, I got a little ATV pusher that have to be pushed, but the tires are all blowed up on them and they're movable. And people that don't pick up their cars, I get on them pretty quick. And I don't like cars sitting around. I don't have room for it. And it's just not a good look, you know what I mean? And I don't know if there's anybody here that drives from the city that writes tickets or whatever, but my lot's always, never has cars sitting around on it, on blocks and stuff like this.
The reason I asked was I was just kind of curious. I saw you pulled the front back all the ways for landscaping area. If I were the owner next door, my only concern might be that it'd be kind of nice if it was back a little bit further so that if you're sitting on the porch that you have a little bit better shot of the street down the way, but that's my only.
Well, and the edge of the porch is right at the edge of the fence as well. So we did line those up on purpose, so the stalls, you literally couldn't get a car because you're not going to 90-degree park it. Otherwise, it'll hang out into the driving space. So you have to push it at a 45. So it should be sheltered to some degree, looking back towards the north.
I'm friends with that lady that lives in that house, and she's good with it all. I know that's just my word, but she's fine with the whole thing.
Yeah. It looks like what you just said, that the first car, the back of the first car is going to be lined up with the house.
Yeah.
Basically, if
Right. And I'd assume if there's only 5 or 6 cars, he's going to put them in the
Right.
spot closest to his building.
So part of my concern is you just talked about how sometimes it can get very crowded on your lot when you try and do it. When you have this extra space, then there's the inclination, well, this is convenient, I can have my space look cleaner and I can move more cars to that back lot. But you're telling us today, your intent is not to use this as the primary?
Well, first of all, there's women with high heels.
Sir, can you come closer to the microphone?
Oh.
Get you on that.
There's like women that pick up cars, and I don't want them walking across gravel, and I want the cars to be convenient for the people to pick up. So we have an office area that's concrete that we put the done cars in. It's got stalls. And the cars for obvious reasons, I don't want somebody that's coming down paying to get their car worked on to have to walk through a maze to go get their car. And I want it right there convenient when they walk out of the office after paying, their cars are sitting right there waiting. Some of the overflow stuff, like I say, that's gonna be, sitting for a day or two could go over there temporarily and just relieve some of the area in the parking lot so we could move stuff around. But the cars that are waiting to be worked on and the cars that are done, for the most part, are gonna be in front of the auto repair in the office. There's really not gonna be a lot of cars parked over there, period.
And if I may, there's another building between your shop and this lot. And you don't own that building?
No, I own that building.
You do own that building?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's the office to the auto repair shop. Just at the, I bought the trailer court because the trailers were boarded up. There was homeless people living in them. There was, it was a mess. There was neighborhood feral cats and critters living in them, and they had a horrid appearance. And it's right next to my shop. So I just wanted to clean the place up. And, you know, and it does look a lot better now that I went over there and killed all the trees that were growing up, little trees and brush, and mowed it down and got rid of the trailers and stuff. So, and it looks a lot better.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir. With that, we'd like to open the public meeting for comments for both items 1A and 1B. We'll have a combined public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak on the issue can come forward to the podium, please. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. I guess we'll address the items in order.
Did we good? Oh, sorry. Just asked if we were going to ask staff questions before, or?
Yeah, you're welcome to ask staff any questions.
Just, again, for clarification, if there's something written on the general note on the plan that's under condition number 1 that you have for the CUP, that those notes are then, in effect, enforceable legally? Is that correct? So when that's written in the note that they won't store vehicles for more than 7 days, that's an enforceable item?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Also, I'm sorry, one other, do we define what's used infrequently? Just wondering, for the parking requirement, it's used infrequently and not open to the public? Is there a definition as to what infrequently is, or is that just kind of a general term?
That's just a general term. There's no
Usually that's
definition.
addressed.
When I said infrequently, that is addressed by the city's policy for surfacing of parking in outside storage areas. So it's just internal, it's a policy that's used for determining what type of paving or what type of surfacing is required. So this fell under design for exterior storage with infrequent traffic and low speeds. So that's where it falls under.
So does the policy then define, so when we use the term infrequently, is that just kind of a term we just kind of use as a judgment term versus having a specific definition is all I'm trying to. I realize not everything has a clear, clean definition. I'm just trying to.
Yeah. So we develop standards that are not in the code,
Okay.
but the idea of infrequent is where you don't have a lot of customer traffic or a lot of in and out traffic. So it isn't any more specific than that.
Okay. That's helpful, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a couple of questions for staff. The report notes that the repair shop itself is a legal non-conforming use, and I was looking for an explanation and confirmation that this wouldn't be a prohibited expansion of a non-conforming use.
So, Commissioners, Commissioner Cowell, it would not be an illegal expansion. To clarify, the repair shop today requires a conditional use permit. The repair shop existed prior to the zoning changing where it became a requirement that it be a conditional use permit. The way we look at this parking lot is you could either look at it as an expansion of a conditional use permit, and there are provisions in the code for that, but it's actually a little less confusing to look at it as a separate principal use, and that is a parking lot for accessory parking off-site, which is listed specifically and as a conditional use. So in that sense, it's not an expansion of a non-conforming use. It's a separate principal use.
So the parking lot is an auxiliary use, a separate and distinct use, even though it serves the principal use of the neighboring property?
I would say that's correct. It's not directly connected to the repair shop because it's in physically, because it's separated by those storage buildings. They're also a non-conforming use, by the way.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask another question about the, I'm a little bit confused by the X1 and CUP designations. The conditional use permit does not restrict the uses that could be used on the, or that are allowed under the X1 zoning, right?
Legally,
You have, if the X1 rezoning is approved, you have all the uses that are permitted in X1.
that is correct. So if the owner does not go forward and take advantage of the conditional use permit and develop property in that manner, they still have all the rights associated with what's allowed in the X1 district.
Now, I understand that the lot is quite small, but 3/10 of an acre, I mean, what kind of, if the owner moves the enterprise and the lots are not merged and that X1 zoning stays there, what would I be able to do as the new owner of that X1 lot?
If you can give me just 1 minute, and I'll be able to answer that question. I want to give you a good, correct answer. So it's possible, under X1 zoning, if that lot was to stand on its own, someone could put in, say, a beauty salon, something like that. They could put in a small retail store. I don't think they could put in just any type of retail, but they could, theoretically, you could put in retail. So, let me see what I want to. For example, a pharmacy is an allowed use. Is a pharmacy going to go on that site? Probably not, because it's so small. Personal services, is, say, nail salon, beauty salon. That's an allowed use. If someone wanted to put in a tobacco shop, I'm not trying to make this sound horrible, but that is something that's allowed.
Mr. Chairman, I know we're not in committee discussion, but the reason I'm asking the question is, I'm being respectful of the owner and his proposal, and he's obviously cleaned up a lot, and that's all positive. But if someone came forward as just the owner of this smaller lot and sought X1 zoning for a use that was unrelated to the repair shop, you probably don't like to play what if, but would that, I mean, you're talking about introducing a non-residential use into a residential neighborhood. Would that be something that staff would be likely to support if it wasn't tied to this repair shop?
I think that the way we're looking at this is the risk of that happening is probably low because he owns it. We know his intentions, he's owned it for a while. But I think it is appropriate to play a what-if game. That's kind of what we do. There are other uses that are probably more threatening than, say, an off-site accessory parking lot. There are also uses that aren't. Residential use, they can still develop it for residential use. But there are uses that, just to give you an honest answer, there are uses that probably would be seem a little more obnoxious than what would be permitted by the conditional use permit.
To the point where the city might initiate a rezoning back? If a tobacco shop were going to go in there instead of a parking lot, would the city consider initiating a rezoning to Put it back to what it is now?
I think that's possible that, if that's something that we did, we would bring it to the
It's
planning
what
commission.
if on top of what if, I know that.
Yeah, we'd bring it to the planning commission and get some direction from the planning commission. I think if, say, somebody starts to do something, starts to get permits and becomes vested in some kind of investment in something else, it'd be pretty difficult to do that. Kind of a point of no return. I think the only, a less riskier way of approaching this is through a plan unit development, but I'm not even sure that even works in this case. That's something that would be an alternative to look at. We don't like to look at the more complicated way to get from A to B than is necessary, and the zoning change and the conditional use permit are the less complicated way of going about that.
Mr. Driver, didn't you have a map that showed both lots to the north of this are X1? Across the street, the lots are X1? I mean, I see a whole lot of X1 on this map. I guess I'm not following the conversation that this is rare or out of order. It seems like everything adjacent to it that's not residential is X1.
Yeah, as far as the zoning goes, everything to the north of it is X1.
Okay.
Yeah, everything in
And I'm not speaking against the proposal here, but I mean, it is moving south into a residential area. And just being mindful of the neighborhood plan and the protection of residential development. And the obvious concern that the folks who were at the meeting aren't here tonight, but have communicated to the Planning Commission that they are sensitive to and have resisted in the past the non-residential development in the area. It's an understandable concern, I think. And again, I'm not speaking against the application here. It's just it's in my mind, it's a close call. And I could be wrong, Mr. Kender.
With that, I would entertain motions for item 1A under public hearing D.
There's one
Mr. Chairman?
one additional item we actually need to add to the conditions for the CUP, which was item, I don't know, which item is it? The CUP item. Upon looking at the site plan, it indicates the surfacing would be 4-inch gravel surfacing. That needs to be revised to 8-inch gravel surfacing to make sure that is consistent with our surfacing policy. Or an approved equivalent. And that is something new the applicant, I don't think, is aware of. Where they can, either it's 8-inch or approved equivalent. 8-inch of gravel or approved equivalent. So if they can demonstrate it can support the load, to be sitting on the parking lot. And concrete or asphalt would work as well.
Mr. Chairman, before you ask for a motion, could I ask a point of information from staff?
Sure.
Procedurally. With the rezoning in a CUP, how is this presented to the city council? I mean, they will, if this goes forward, well, regardless of whether whatever the recommendation is, when it goes to the city council, they will take 2 separate actions. And you guys have been down this path before with this council, I haven't. If the council approves the rezoning, but for whatever reason might not approve the CUP, is that a rejection of the Planning Commission's recommendation and sending it back to us, absent a supermajority vote, or does it go forward as the rezoning without the CUP?
It would be the latter, the rezoning without the CUP.
Okay, okay. So the CUP denial is the separate denial of this, and so we try to marry this together to have it make sense, to have it workable, but the city council could, for whatever reason, take it apart.
That's true.
Right.
It could, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Kalp, I just weigh in here a little bit. I know you're just reading between the questions a little bit. Are there other options? I don't know if that's a better way to put it, but from a zoning standpoint, I think this was mentioned, since he does own all of the property north of there, we could have potentially done a PUD and accomplish the same thing with restrictions on probably some of the commercial elements that I think and the neighbors would be concerned about. That is, I personally wasn't aware he owned the property in between, but that being said, that is an option if you wish to go down that road. We have not discussed that with the applicant, is that correct?
That's correct.
As Mike was saying.
Not recently, anyway.
As Mike was saying, we're trying to accomplish goals without their goals and land use goals with shortest distance between point A and B. Mixed use is pretty flexible and has some performance standards in there that do tighten things up a bit, which is good from an administrative standpoint. Not everything has to be a PUD. So we generally try to go a non-PUD route unless the commission feels like that is a more appropriate route to go. So just to give you a further choice.
But so the reality is not so much the concern with the current owner, but since the three properties are adjoining and at the same zoning, if they're sold as a group, the property could be all redone, the three together, into one type of business that meets the X1 zoning, and it would be across the three lots, and that would be okay.
Yeah, you could imagine that maybe the first two lots have pretty much full X1 use, and when you get to that transition lot on the south there, that third piece of property, you could tighten that up a bit and restrict it to more than what the X1 allows, would be my thought. I'll stop.
Yeah.
Any other questions for staff? I would again entertain any motion for item 1A under D, public hearings.
Mr. Chair, based on the findings and analysis in the staff report, I move to recommend to the governing body approval of the reclassification of the property to X1 mixed-use district in conjunction with the approval of conditional use permit case CU 19-08 for Shorey Automotive.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yeah, well, so going back to Commissioner Kopp's question, this seems to be, this is just a recommendation in conjunction with approval. But again, they don't have to follow that and can split. Although we're recommending presumably that it's done in conjunction.
Point of clarification, what was the motion on the zoning?
Yes.
Okay.
I guess the question is to clarify, in conjunction with approval of the CUP?
That's,
So I'm trying to figure out what does that mean that What would happen if we would not recommend the approval of the CUP? Does that mean this doesn't go forward? Because it's supposed to be in conjunction. So I'm trying to figure out the language of this motion.
Okay.
Sorry, I hadn't noticed that before.
Sure, no, good point. Obviously, if you don't approve the rezoning, then we're not going to consider the CUP. So I guess that is just expanding upon your intent. Your intent is to consider the CUP by approving this zoning. It's still split question.
Any other further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I know this is a long shot here, or it's unlikely, but I guess I'd like to have the record show, if there's favorable action taken by the Planning Commission tonight, that the record would show that our expectation is that the applicant will use the property for the use set out in the conditional use permit. If the governing body, I guess I'm going to disagree with you all here a little bit, if the governing body, the city council, were to approve the rezoning to X1, but for whatever reason deny the CUP, I would like to see that be seen as a rejection of the Planning Commission's recommendation. We're marrying these two things together. And at least in my case, I mean, if I vote favorably for it, it's going to be the rezoning with the CUP. If it was just an issue of the X1 zoning itself, I would have some reservations about that. So I'm just speaking for myself here, but I think if the council disagreed with the CUP but agreed to rezoning, I would like to think it would come back to us in the absence of a supermajority vote by the council to override the recommendation of the Planning Commission. But I don't know what the precedent has been, or if there is precedent. There has to be precedent for a rezoning going up simultaneous with the CUP.
Yeah. Well, I would say that if you ask staff, I mean, we're recommending approval of the X1. And it's, I mean, you're right. I mean, it is in conjunction with looking at the CUP as well. If somebody brought us an X1 straight zoning, rezoning, without any knowledge of what they want to use it for, yeah, that may be a different analysis that comes to you. So, yeah, I think technically we have two questions to ask you tonight, or two motions to make. But yeah, our recommendation definitely ties the two together. Legally, we split the question though, but the minutes would reflect what you just noted, and we can have, if that does come up, that's something that legal can advise on.
Well, I'm one person. I
understand.
don't presume to speak for anybody else on the Planning Commission.
Can you add language to a motion to tie the two together?
So you would move to approve the X1 zoning and the CUP.
Right, just do one motion.
I'm comfortable with that. And if the city council isn't comfortable, what they normally do, they usually remand it back to the planning commission. If there are issues that they're uncomfortable with, they generally don't amend a recommendation on the fly. They'll send it back to you.
Has there ever been, maybe this helps answer Commissioner Kopp's question, has there ever been a time where you've had a zoning and CUP go up together and they've approved the zoning and not the CUP?
Not in my recollection.
Usually not.
Do we have to vote down the current motion to re-amend it?
No.
There can be a substitute motion.
Yeah, you can just, was it seconded, your motion?
Yes.
Oh, okay, would the second agree to amend the motion?
Reaffirm my second.
Motion would be to approve the X1 zoning and the CUP.
Right.
Okay.
Are you making said change?
Yes. Do you need me to
No,
go through the whole.
Do you all understand what the motion is?
Yes.
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 Okay.
Does Chris understand what the motion is? That's more important.
And then, so in tying this together, with the additional general note 3 to
With
the
those
CUP,
conditions.
based on Ms. Driver's recommendation.
So we probably need to redo the motion then to also include all the conditions that are subject to the,
In the staff
for the,
report.
right, for the motion on the CUP. So the motion probably needs to include those conditions, right?
Okay, so it would be a motion to approve the X1 zoning and the conditional use permit with the conditions stated in staff's report, and adding an additional condition for an 8-inch gravel or approved equivalent surface.
Or, can I add to that?
What?
Or at the applicant's choosing, I don't know if it's needs to say if they're choosing, but, or concrete or asphalt. Since the applicant has never, we're springing this on them
On them,
tonight,
okay.
unfortunately. We don't like to do that. But if they choose to use concrete or asphalt, then they would have that ability to do that. So the condition needs to give them those options, in my recommendation. They either choose 8 inches aggregate surface on compacted subgrade, or approved equivalent, or concrete or asphalt
Concrete or asphalt.
in accordance with city standards.
Okay. Okay, so it would be the motion to approve the X1 zoning and the conditional use permit with all of the conditions stated in the staff report, with the addition of one more, 8-inch gravel aggregate or approved equivalent, or concrete or asphalt for the surface parking lot.
Yeah, I think you can,
In accordance with city
in
standards.
accordance with city standards.
Wouldn't the only options to get an approved equivalent be concrete and asphalt?
We don't really know. I guess that's up to the civil engineer to determine that. It's a performance standard, so, I mean, in reality, you might be right about that, but.
That's-
Nice.
Okay, do you all understand the
Motion and a second are on board with that,
Second.
Yes.
Okay.
all right.
Vote.
Okay, Mr. Warner,
Aye.
Mr. Kelp,
Aye.
Mr. Freed,
Aye.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
and Mr. Armstrong.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Move on to item E, communications to the commission.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any. The last zoning item that you acted on last month will be heard tomorrow night. So other than wondering why we're missing 3 people, I looked over and I saw Commissioner Freed with an ugly sweater on and wondered if that had anything to do with it, but anyway. Well,
They were here earlier.
that's right, they were here earlier.
They're all at holiday parties or offended by the sweater? What's the inference?
The minutes reflect he has an ugly sweater on.
Wow, this is getting tougher by the minute.
And you thought the zoning case was bad.
All right, thanks, everyone. Have a good holiday. Appreciate your time tonight. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.